All right. Good day, everybody. I'm Jeff Hardy. I'm your host for this particular webinar. It's called MSPs and Cyber Insurance, Upselling Security to Help Clients Get Coverage. I'm very excited about this. Let's meet the panel, right? Let's talk about who we have coming today. So on our next slide, you can see that first up, we have Joseph Brunsman. He's the managing member of Brunsman Advisory Group. All things an expert in insurance, especially cyber insurance. Welcome, Joseph. Thank you for coming to the webinar today.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
Perfect. It's going to be a great time. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Also joining us is, a legend in the cybersecurity and hacking circles is Candid West. He's VP of Product Management at Acronis. Candid, it's always great to have you, my friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
Good. And rounding out the panel is the person who understands the inner workings of the product as good as anyone here, Stephen Nichols, Director of Solutions Engineering. You know everything on the ins and outs. Thank you for coming, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to both the little bit of a demo later, but also really looking forward to that panel discussion. They're always lively, so looking forward to it.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. All right, so let's review our agenda for the day. It's going to be a good one. This portion right here, introduction to housekeeping, it's what we're doing together right now. Then Candid's going to come in and do a cyber threat update. He's going to give us kind of a state of what the risks are that we're facing right now. Then I'll have a fireside chat with Joseph Brunsman talking about cyber insurance and risk. After that, Stephen's going to come on and he's going to show you how to configure packages inside of Acronis. So that you can take and help your customers be safe and compliant. And then we'll bring everybody in for a panel discussion and then follow it up. Remember, if you've got a question, type it in that Q&A thing at the end, and we'll be sure and get your question in if possible. Sometimes we get too many questions and we run out of time, but I think we're going to try to get them all in today. Good. And then we'll have some resources for you at the end. We have got some links and QR codes for you, and so stick around and we'll get this to you right away. So let's dive right in. First up, cyber threat update. Candid West, how dangerous is it out there right now for all of us?
Hey, thanks for that, for the introduction. Yes, I'm not talking about the weather. Depending on where you are, I know it might be icy out there, so keep that in mind as well. But of course, we're on the cyberspace, right? And for 2024, it's gonna get, let's say, at least as bad as we've seen in the last year, if not even worse. So currently we see about 300,000 new malware samples every day. I know the year has just started, but that's slightly ahead of what we've seen at the end of last year. But for each of those malware samples, we see that they on average live less than 2 days, which means that they're generated usually through an automated script, and then they're used, and then of course at one point some old traditional signatures are catching up to it, but at that point some new threat has already been released. And it's getting more and more personalized as well. So if we dive into how are the attackers actually getting into the machine, right? We still see the classical malicious messages. Email is by far still the attack vector number one because it still works, right? And yes, of course, they have changed a little bit. I'll have an example on the next slide, but we still know those malicious attachments that you shouldn't open, right? And usually it has a catchy message with some social engineering, like, hey, your parcel delivery could not be sent to you. Please check here for the new invoice. And nowadays, you of course can even use ChatGPT or any of those large language models, which can then generate the text not just in English, but nearly in every language out there, nearly perfect, and therefore kind of fool everyone. Although we all know that most people would probably still open the email, even, yes, if it's not sent by generative AI. On the other hand, we also seen many attackers using unpatched vulnerabilities. There's usually a little bit more than 22,000 new vulnerabilities discovered last year. Not all of them are serious as in terms of critical, right, and can lead to code execution or remote code execution, but a few hundred of those do. And if you don't patch it because either you're not aware that you're actually even using that software because you're not having a software inventory, or you don't have a good vulnerability assessment and patch management, then be assured the attackers definitely will. And we've seen that usually 15 minutes after the disclosure of a new vulnerability, the attackers are already scanning for those Exchange servers that you might still have, those, Pulse VPN or Ivanti now or MoveIt or any of those vulnerabilities that have been executed over and over again in the last few months. And of course, sometimes it might also just be a misconfiguration. So make sure that you actually know how your services are configured. And yes, sometimes, of course, cloud is also used for bad things. I'm definitely a fan of cloud services and moving things to the cloud. That can definitely help you and your business. But of course, the attackers are using the same, right? They're now uploading their malware onto Azure, Google Cloud, or AWS, and then linking to it. And depending on how you set it up, your system might trust it because it's the trusted cloud link, right? It's the trusted domain, nothing fishy there. It's just that it's a sub-page there. And that can lead to phishing websites, malware, or any of those attack vectors. We've seen an increase steadily over the last, well, actually 15 years, but in the last 5 years with SolarWinds, Orion Breach, Kaseya VSA, the supply chain attacks, right? And it kind of grows and grows. So it's not just that large software vendors are attacked and then kind of infiltrated to have a backdoor in their legitimate package. We also see open source software. So some GitHub repositories are being attacked and then some backdoors are being added. So depending on what you have in dependencies on your own software, that might actually automatically download some backdoor code into your environment. And of course, we all know about the weak passwords, right? I mean, Jeff and I have been talking about probably a decade, at least it feels like, when are we going to get passwordless? And we're getting closer and closer, but classic static passwords are still everywhere to be seen. We see more and more moving to multi-factor authentication, but even those are not foolproofed, right? And we've seen a few recent cases, like the SEC, which had their account being compromised because they didn't even enable multi-factor authentication, apparently. So this is definitely something to keep in mind because there are underground sites and initial access brokers which are selling those access, which basically means they don't even have the time to go after all of those credentials that they have, and they sell it out to others to profit from it. And the last vector to mention is, of course, the human factor. Often overlooked, but it can be really devastating. And I'm not even meaning that we are all making mistakes because we're human, right? And IT is getting more and more complex, so the risk of those mistakes is probably increasing as well. Sometimes it's also an insider attack. So they might deliberately download something. We've seen many ransomware groups actually asking and say, hey, if you download this executable, execute it in your environment, we give you $10,000 and 2% of any ransom that your company pays. So if you have a disgruntled employee, right, and well, you might just double click it and then say, oh, sorry, I thought it's a new nice cat video, right? I mean, plausible deniability, and he might still get the money. So would you be able to detect that? Or in the other case, do you actually trust all your employees and all your customers as well? But let's be a bit more specific. So 3 of the kind of trends that we saw at the end of last year are highlighted here on that slide. One is the QR codes being used for phishing emails. So nowadays, we are all kind of trained. If you have something that looks kind of a fishy, like a QR code, you're probably going to take your smartphone, snap a picture, and then go to that website. But because you're using your smartphone, you might not have a security solution on it, so you might not see that this is a phishing website, which is now asking for your M365 password, right? So that's the first step, which is dangerous. The second one, as I mentioned, is they're trying to get around that multi-factor authentication if you have enabled it. So we've seen more and more of those phishing websites actually use a proxy in between, and this will then not really care about the multi-factor authentication token, but steal your session token. Because basically once you're logged in, you don't have to give the password for another 1 hour, 2 hour, maybe even 24 hours. So during that time, they can just hijack your current web session and do whatever they want. And normally that's something like adding a forwarding rule for all your emails so that they then can profit from anything you receive. Another thing we have seen specifically around MSPs is, of course, attacking the infrastructure that you have, attacking the tools that you already have inside your environment. So it used to be the living off the land or let's say more bigger, the living of your infrastructure. So the attackers, they of course love if you have PSA tools for software deployment or remote monitoring and managing tools, RMM tools, right? That allow them to deploy their ransomware to kind of look into your environment and hop from one machine to another. And all it usually takes is one account of an admin which had a weak password, or as we said, just fell for a phishing website and then got something in there. And yes, maybe you don't have anything that they want, well, then they just drop something which is legitimate, could be AnyDesk or TeamViewer or any of those RMM tools or remote access tools, which might show up in your visibility and you say, well, that's kind of odd. We don't really use that software, but it's legit, so what could possibly go wrong? While the attacker is actually taking over your network and therefore your customers. And of course, as the last one, we've seen that, yes, unfortunately, they do not really like security tools, so they try to get rid of them. It's kind of the classical thing, like we've seen with the bank attacks in the past, right? They want to get rid of those security cameras. So in the good old Hollywood movies, they would probably just disconnect them, or smarter, put in a loop so they don't see that someone is in the vault. Well, in the digital world, that means they're going to try and remove all the log files. They try to delete the backups. That is why Acronis is, of course, protecting the backups or providing you with immutable storage so that no one can actually delete them. Even if your admin account has been hacked, they cannot delete the backups. But we also seen that they more often try to uninstall the security tools because then they can use whatever malware they want without the risk of getting it detected. Or they're adding exclusions for the whole drive. They start exfiltrating data through backup jobs to their own destination. So just imagine there's a lot of shenanigans that they can do. And for some of them, they don't even need malware, right? So that's where more advanced tools like endpoint detection response come into play, where you want to know what is the behavior, what is actually happening on your machines, so you know, even if legitimate tools are doing something, that something might be something you want to be alerted about. And of course, our all-time favorite ransomware will also keep us busy for 2024, right? They have started to increase the pressure, so once they're in, they of course will contact your end customer if you're an MSP, and then ask the end customer to ring you up and say, hey, maybe you should pay it because I don't want my data to be leaked. They will even report you to the privacy commissioners like GDPR privacy regulations or SEC in the US, where you have to report any data breaches. They will say, well, don't worry, if you don't pay us, we're going to report to you, and you will still have the bad press and the fine probably to pay. We also see that they definitely know their targets. They look around, they will read a few emails, learn a little bit about your habits. They definitely love if they find some incident response plan, and hopefully you have one. And I always make the joke, and I know Jeff already gets bored of that, but I always say, print your incident response plan out and laminate it, right? Because if you have it internal on your wiki or Confluence page or whatever, that's nice and good, but that's probably the first server which gets encrypted and is down. Do you really remember all those numbers and all those passwords for the server? I definitely don't. So make sure that you have something printed out. And last but not least, yes, we also seen that they have adapted their techniques. Some of them now use actually 2 different ransomwares because law enforcement is, of course, getting better. The FBI and other law enforcements have attacked, for example, the Alpha ransomware group in December last year. At least for a time, they got access to their backend servers. But if you have 2 encryptions from 2 different ransomware groups, that makes it quite hard for law enforcement to get their hands on the keys. And they also love to go over the cloud. As we said, of course, that's where the data is. And in the end, that's where the money is for the attackers if they're able to steal it and maybe disrupt it by encryption. So as a last thing, well, what happens if something actually attacked you successfully? And I mean, the old saying is, it's not really a question of if, it's a question of when. Because you've seen the 300,000 new malware samples every given day. The chances are quite high that they are banging at your door as well. The question is, do you actually notice them? Can you prevent them? Or maybe they're already inside your organization. So the question is, if it happens, are you capable of recovering and how fast? So did you do a business impact analysis? And this should, of course, influence your incident response plan. Make sure that you know which servers you need to restore first, and make sure that you have the right people with the right access codes. If you need one specific admin and he's on a cruise in the Bahamas, well, maybe he has no reception and you don't really want to wait 24 hours till he gets to the next port, right? You need to make sure that you have a backup plan for that. The second part is, even if you have, how fast can you recover and how long can you actually survive without it? And this sounds trivial, but A, it takes a lot of resources, so sometimes you need to find external ones. And B, sometimes even if you do pay, that might not solve your issue. You probably all remember the Colonial Pipeline attack in the US, where ransomware group took down Colonial Pipeline. They ended up paying 4.4 million US dollars. They got something back in the end, but initially they paid. They got a decryption tool, which is not always guaranteed, but it turns out the decryption tool was not really fast, because the attackers, they don't really care, right? They don't do multi-threading. You pay, you get something. They never promise that it will be something within minutes. So the company actually in the end paid for it, but didn't use it because it was slower than restoring from backup and working on kind of the deficit between it. So keep that in mind, that sometimes, yes, you need definitely to plan what's your plan B strategy. And of course, even if you have restored, and hopefully, knock on wood, you do have a backup, which is current and you can restore within a good time frame, well, if the attackers got some data and stole those, there might still be some brand reputation, right? Some trust or loyalty being lost with your customers, because nobody really loves if their data is stolen and then sent to the internet. So there's many things that we can and probably should discuss, but that's what the panel is for. So I don't want to steal more time, and I'm going to hand it back to Jeff for, I think, the first poll.
Well, we're going to have the first poll. Before you go, I didn't know. I mean, I was following when the SEC, when their X account got hacked, I was following that entire thread, and I didn't know that it was an unsecured password and no 2FA. I did not know that was the reason. That's even the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States bumps up against this password issue.
Funny enough, they did have in their own messages that you should follow best practices, including MFA, but it kind of shows you that, yes, talking is one thing, you need to implement those things as well. But that's why we go to some demos afterwards with Stephen. Absolutely.
And by the way, Candid, during your presentation, we've got 3 questions that popped in. So stick around for that panel discussion, because we're gonna have some hot topics.
Gladly will.
All right, so thank you, Candid. Now let's go ahead and let's take our first poll. All right, let's go ahead and have it real quick. Here it is. So the question is, do your customers rely on you to help them qualify for cyber insurance? Just answer it out there. It's very, very common out there, and I want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to give that feedback and results. And a couple of the answers are surprising me. This is good. Here we go. Take about 30 seconds more or so to get your answer in. Make sure you vote. Has everybody a chance to cast your vote if you want to? Give it another minute or two, another second or two, I mean. All right, I'm going to end the poll now, and let's share the results. All right, so you can see that almost 30% of you say you even fill out the insurance applications for them. Wow, 47% consult and then take care of it on their own. 14% said really discuss, and 11% said that your clients never asked about cyber insurance. That's surprising to me in the current environment, but wonderful. So thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate that. Let's move on then quickly. Next up, we have Joseph Brunsman, and Joseph, Joseph, just join me. Come up on screen here. You are an expert in error and omissions policies and cyber insurance policies, and you consult with companies all the time to help them. I know who you are. We've met online, and we've talked. We have a chance to talk for a while. But a lot of people who are on the call here with us, they don't know you. Take a moment, introduce yourself and Brunsman Advisory Group.
Oh, certainly. Thank you, Jeff. Real quick, if I could take a step back on that previous poll that you had. I would argue for every MSP that's on this webinar right now, you should contractually require your clients to carry cyber insurance within your MSA. That is one of the biggest risk transference mechanisms, so like safety mechanisms for your MSP that you could possibly do. And then I have a whole video on if you should fill out those client cyber applications or not. If you just YouTube my name, they'll get some more information there after this webinar. As for myself, am I an expert? I don't know. It's like calling yourself beautiful. I'll let you I'll let you do that one. But yeah, so the whole reason I got into this is I'm a former IT. I got my bachelor's in robotics, and then ultimately my master's in cybersecurity law. I've written a whole bunch of books. Best-selling author in the nation on the topic of cyber insurance and cybersecurity law. I do obviously cyber insurance for just about every industry out there, and then work closely with providing insurance for MSPs on like the tech E&O side and some other stuff for those guys. So it's kind of an interesting position where I get to see both sides of the equation. And I just love talking about this stuff because I was super fascinated in it years ago, almost a decade ago, long before anybody cared. You know, I couldn't pay people to listen to me talk. So now I get to talk about something that I really enjoy, I find super interesting. So I am super excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, great. So first off, I gotta say, I've been saving the questions to the end, and the questions are still coming in. But one question I just got to share with you. It was more of a comment. It says, "You are a beautiful man, Joseph." So somebody out there, you have at least one fan. You know, we've got hundreds of people on this call, and at least one of them is a fan. All right. So all right. Now, I've been hearing, you know, from business leaders. You know, we talk to MSPs and to small businesses and enterprises. That's my job. And I've heard again and again that the best way to know that if your cybersecurity is up to snuff and compliant is to read a cybersecurity policy questionnaire, because something about the fact that the insurance companies got their money on the line makes them ask the right questions. Is this true? Are insurance companies setting the pace for cybersecurity compliance going forward?
That's a great question. So yes and no. Let me throw on my legal hat here. Yes and no, right? So I would say, you know, one, if a cyber insurance company is asking the question, right, there's probably a good reason they're asking that question, because typically speaking, the more questions they put on an application, the fewer the number of people that are going to want to be able to fill that out. And then kind of the agent broker in the interim doesn't like typically answering questions about this area because they have no technology background, right? So if an insurance company is asking, you know, do you have EDR? Do you have immutable backups, et cetera? There's probably a pretty good reason why they're trying to ask that. Now, as far as compliance goes, I would say compliance are straight up legal requirements, right? So the insurance industry isn't per se running a full legal evaluation of what particular statutory regimes that the cyber insurance applicant can fall under. That's where they'd really have to go to a data privacy attorney to get that kind of spun up. But I mean, once again, there are so many more requirements than people really have any concept of, even for small businesses, right? And that's an area that I talk about a lot, where that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But a great example would be like EDR just popped up, right? So 23 NYCRR 500, that's the New York Department of Financial Services. They're the first people to come out to say, hey, if you're a Class A company, so it's roughly 20 million in revenue, you must have EDR on your systems, right? So now we can just assume, like any other data security law that's out there, they're going to start with the big guys and then it starts working its way down, right? So it's not only a good idea, but now a legal requirement for companies falling under the auspices of that law. Next year, or maybe 2-3 years from now, it'll be $10 million companies. Then a few years after that is 5 million. And then it might just be a straight up requirement under their breach notification and data security law for all of New York, right? That'd be very, very common to see something like that. So I often tell people, you know, hey, cyber insurance is a good place to start. Look at what they're asking. As an MSP, sit down, right? Kind of go through some of those requirements. For Chris Lee, that was 23 NYCRR 500. So I'll mark that answered live. So go through that on the application. But also, I mean, you could pick my book up for free where I go through all the major laws there, and it's on my YouTube channel. And you can have a pretty solid understanding, right? To be able to tell your client, hey, you're not giving legal advice, but here's some other legal requirements you may have. So instead of the MSP saying, hey, buy my stuff, right? It's the MSP sitting down with their client saying, all right, let's figure out how to mutually get together and solve this problem.
Okay, it's great you're going to mention that, because I know that in the demo portion, Stephen's going to actually walk through, setting up EDR, what that looks like inside the application. So that's very apropos. Okay, now let's tie your conversation, what you just said, with what Candid said. A lot of insurance companies have just gotten out of the business of writing cyber insurance policies. At least that's what I've heard. Is it just because of risk? Is there another reason? What's the answer?
They've lost a ton of money. It's probably the easiest way to explain it. So, one, it turns out, this may not be a surprise for anybody here, but for an insurance company, they were kind of surprised to learn that, wow, cybersecurity is actually really complicated, very multifaceted. It's always changing. Just when we think, hey, all right, ransomware is the boogeyman in the room, everybody kind of shuffles over there. We put in all the protections, then it turns into business email compromise, right? So it's this kind of constantly moving target that's very difficult to nail down. And for insurance companies, one, you have to think the insurance industry is the most heavily regulated industry in the world, right? So if they're pricing for the risk of ransomware for this size of company in some particular industry, and then all of a sudden the winds change and now it's going to be business email compromise for that industry and that type of revenue band of client, then they suddenly just completely misprice the risk and they are at risk of losing potentially even more money. So long ago, I'd say, say like 2020-ish, I could ask for anything under the sun and it was good to go. It was like the wild west of insurance. And it was a lot of fun. So if I needed an extra $1 million on a sublimit for social engineering, it was, okay, cool, here you go. Right? Nowadays, you're lucky to get 250,000 and they're not going to increase that sublimit at all. So it's just a lot of companies have lost a lot of money. You have rising interest rates, that's playing into it. So a lot of the VCPE money that used to be there isn't there anymore. And then fundamentally, it's a lack of data, right? So each insurance company, you kind of have to build this critical mass and hope to God you don't lose enough money in the interim to put you out of business. But even something simple like, how do you put a number to how much safer you are with immutable backups versus not having immutable backups, or a 3-2-1 backup strategy versus not having a 3-2-1 backup strategy, right? The actuaries have to put a number to that. That just takes large numbers. So it's a difficult thing to do.
I've seen in preparing for this webinar and my other research, I've looked at, I can't tell you how many, I was going to say dozens, and that's probably accurate, of cyber insurance questionnaires from different companies. And for small businesses, it can be like a couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages. And for larger businesses, I've seen a dozen pages or even more of questions that you have to answer. And is this just all a symptom of that? The insurance companies, the larger the risk, the more careful they're going to be. Is that just the symptom of the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot more money on the line, right? So
yeah,
part of it is they're trying to build up the data sets. Another part of it is, if you're putting up tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars on these cyber insurance policies as a cyber insurance company, you better well know precisely what that risk is. You want a very deep dive, especially for larger companies, into what they're doing, what they're not doing. So that way you have a much deeper understanding. Now, obviously for much larger organizations, there's fewer insurance companies doing it. They have a much bigger staff. They can sit, pour through all this. So sometimes it's me, there's CISO, CTO, et cetera, and legal counsel sitting down, going question by question. Whereas the smaller guys can't really afford to do that, nor would they reasonably be expected to pull off something like that. But kind of the name of the game here is, even for the most basic cyber insurance companies out there, where it used to be, hey, name, address, and then an external vulnerability scan, and you have insurance. Even those guys are switching back over to, all right, we need to ask some more questions here to get a little more fidelity. Even for tiny companies just getting a $500,000 policy, they want to know more.
Joseph, we're out of time for this segment, but I got a lot more questions, and some more questions are piling up from the audience. Would you come back and join me in the panel and stick around, okay? Because we need to continue this discussion.
Of course.
Perfect. All right, so next up, guys, we're going to be talking to Stephen Nichols. He's going to actually give us a demo and show us, Joseph just mentioned EDR and how it's a requirement he's starting to see, specifically in New York, rolling out to organizations. He's going to show us how to do that. But before he does, I think let's take another poll. Let's go ahead and do another poll real quick. And let's see here. Let's see if I can push the buttons correctly. All right, so here's the question. What has been your interaction with cyber insurance claims so far? In other words, have you been involved in a few cyber insurance claims? You've been involved in just one or twice, or no, not yet. And I'm saying not. I think that the not yet is important, because I think just like hackers, it's really not if, it's a matter of when. But everybody answer your question. Give you all a few moments to answer. 30 seconds more. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to end this poll right now, and I'll show you the results. So here we go. So 13% of our audience today have been directly involved in more than one cyber insurance claim, and 16% have been involved in one, and then 71% of you have not yet been involved in a cyber insurance claim. Good for you. I hope your luck continues. Let's make sure that let's see if we can. You know what, Stephen? Why don't you come on and show those guys about how to maybe set things up inside and maybe avoid a few cyber insurance claims in the future. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the options and talk a little bit about some of the capabilities and what you should be thinking about when you're putting together your offering to your customers. So Acronis Cybertech Cloud is, a cloud-based platform that allows you to manage your customers, manage the agents that are installed on them, and what we call protection plans. That's the set of instructions to those agents about what things are turned on and how they're configured. So, we're now looking at what an MSP would see. These are the different customer tenants. We got a quick view here. There's lots of things about this that I'm not going to have time to show, but I want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we know that when working with technicians and even with end customers, if they're going to have access, being able to do that in their native language certainly makes things a lot easier to understand. So you have the ability to go in here and change the language of the interface. So we have a large number of languages that are available, but let's just, for example, switch to Spanish here. So it's just going to take a second. It's going to reload the page, and then we're going to find all the menu items and everything are going to be in Spanish. And you can do the same thing for a bunch of the other languages, but this just makes it much easier for people in their native language to be able to go and navigate and things like that. Now, my first language is English, so I'm going to switch back because it's going to make the rest of my demo a little bit easier. But in addition to that, let's talk a little bit about as a when you're setting a customer up. One of the first things we want to be able to do, and you'll get this opportunity when you go through the wizard to create a customer, but you want to make sure that the offering items are enabled. So when we talk about things like advanced security plus EDR, we want to make sure we've got that checkbox. Now it's grayed out here because I actually have workloads that are already using it, so I can't disable it. But I do have the ability to make sure that I have that enabled. And that's going to mean that once I get in on into the customer tenant, I'm going to be able to take advantage of those features. So if you kind of think of what we're building here, we're kind of building on a menu. And then when we create a protection plan, we're actually placing an order. Once you have that protection plan in place, that's when you're going to be billed for that particular service. So you can go ahead and safely enable it here. And there's not going to be any charges until you actually apply that to a protection plan to a device. So let's go ahead here and move into one of our customer tenants, our AAA designs. And one of the important things about security is having visibility. So the first screen we land on here is a kind of our overview screen. This is made up of a number of widgets. We have the ability to go in and add a large, a selection of wizards. So if we wanted to go in and we wanted to look at, for example, some patch management, remote access, vulnerability assessment, we could look at threat defense. So we can see, things like recently affected. So depending on what you've got configured and what is going on in that particular customer tenant, you can configure each of these widgets. And then in a lot of cases, you can even drill down and go in and change the names, select, how much information that you want. And that also helps you can also make that build reports. So down in the reporting, we use those same widgets. And that allows you to make sure that you have the visibility into what's going on. The other thing that's important is alerts. So if I go in here and I go by alert category and I drill down, I can actually look at EDR in particular. So I can see we've got incidents detected. It shows just kind of the level of those incidents. And I can go in if I want and right from here investigate that incident. So that's going to take me into the EDR interface and be able to very easily go in and take care of it. You notice some of these have already been mitigated, but I have one that's not mitigated here. But before we actually get to the point where the system is reporting incidents, we're going to need to send that instructions out to the agent. So we'll want to add the device. So you have the ability to add your devices here. You can download the agent. We can also push that out through some of the integrations we have with RMM and PSA tools. We have lots of other different methods. You can even just script that out to install the agent. Once that agent is installed and registered, that device is going to show up here. And then I'm going to be able to apply a protection plan to that particular device. And that's going to give me the ability, if I want to protect that device, to set that set of instructions. First, I'm going to get to pick from the list of existing protection plans. So I can go in and just apply one of those, or I can create a new protection plan. If I go down here to the management section, we can see all of the protection plans that we have. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new one because I think this is a really good way to talk about some of the capabilities and things you should be turning on. So we have a bunch of things turned on by default. One of the things that we recommend that you add is you enable EDR. So enabling EDR, or endpoint detection and response, is going to turn on a number of the antivirus and anti-malware protections, as well as URL filtering, because all of those work together in order to make sure you're protected. But in addition to that, there's a number of other components in the protection plan that extend the capabilities of the protection. So making sure that you have a backup of the entire machine means that you can roll that machine back. Making sure that that backup is stored both locally as well as in the cloud gives you the ability to be able to restore that. And even if those local backups become compromised during a ransomware attack, if that is an immutable backup, which is stored in the Acronis cloud, it gives another layer of protection. Under the antivirus and anti-malware, we have a number of different settings which are enabled. But for example, self-protection is going to mean that other services or other applications are going to not be able to make changes to the Acronis agent or those local backups. It makes it more difficult for threat actors to defeat those settings. We also are looking at both real-time protection as well as scheduled scans. Even though modern solutions use things like exploit prevention and behavior engines, those real-time scans are still important to catch files at rest that may be in need of being quarantined. And then that URL filtering is going to give you that protection from the malicious URLs, and make sure that if someone does click on a link, it's not going to take something to a malicious site. Also, turning on vulnerability assessment and patch management is valuable because we know a couple of things. One, about 60% of the incidents that involve a vulnerability where it was exploited, that vulnerability actually had a known patch and could have been patched. So making sure that you're keeping those systems up to date. Our patch management allows you to automate that process so that you can get those patches out faster. And by enabling within that patch management a pre-update backup, if you turn that on, means that even if that patch has a conflict, you end up blue screening, you're not going to lose any data because immediately before putting that patch in place, it's going to capture a new restore point. So there's a number of different features that are all included in the protection plan, and having those enabled is going to give you the ability to make sure that those workloads are as protected as they can be. Now, once we've actually got that protection plan in place, it's running, I can now go back up here to my alerts, and we can take a very quick look at an investigation. So in EDR, we can actually see that we have an incident. We can actually see that it was affecting a workload, and we can actually, now maybe let's go back to the incidents. I'm gonna grab a different one here. And if I go to the investigation, we can see we have a description of the incident. We can see, all of this data that's here. But if I actually go in and choose something that has happened, I can see a bunch of information about it. The most important thing, though, is I can go and remediate that incident. So first of all, I can choose that it's a true positive. I can go and look and then do things like recover the workload, whether that's disaster recovery or just recovering it entirely. I can quarantine, and if it's available, I can actually even use that backup that I have to roll back individual files that may have been changed. And then I can add that to the block list so that on other devices, it's not going to remain a vulnerability. And if there's a patch available, it's going to check here, I can actually go ahead and apply those patches. So all of these actions can be taken from a remediate button, meaning that I'm going to take care of the incident and I'm going to be better protected in the future. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to the Acronis Cybertech Cloud that I can cover in a couple of minutes, but I want to leave some time for our Q&A and our panel discussion. So with that, I will turn things back over to Jeff.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. It's remarkable. You were just talking about remediating from within the console. I was talking to a larger MSP, just this last week, and they said that most of the time now, since they've started using Acronis Advanced Security with EDR, most of the time they resolve issues even before their client knows there was an issue.
Absolutely. That combination of the auto remediation. So if it's an incident that is, we have high degree of confidence that we understand and we're able to apply, we can actually just auto remediate that incident. And if it is a more complex one that takes an investigation, it's much faster, much easier. And as a result, you're able to get out in front of it, like you said, even often before the end user or customer knows that there's a problem.
Perfect. All right. Now, hey, Stephen, stick around. I want to invite Candid and Joseph to come back on for the panel discussion. And guys, we've been talking about this, for a couple of weeks. I'm going to keep this panel discussion portion tight because we have 18 questions queued up. We're not going to get to them all, and no matter what. But I'm going to take and handle the panel discussion for quicker than we planned, so we can get to those questions right away. Okay. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Okay. first things first. Biggest topic in tech. What is it? It's been the last 14 months. Biggest topic has been artificial intelligence. AI this, AI that, AIS, AI that. And so let's take one at a time. Let's talk about AI. Candid, what is the current impact of AI on cyber threats, and should service providers care?
I'm already afraid that you're going to ask if I'm real or not, if it's a deep fake, because that is one of the biggest things that we see at the moment. Deep fake as in creating fake videos, images, voice patterns. And I mean, you can do so many things for that, right? You can do disinformation campaigns, which can actually ruin some companies. So, I mean, Joseph was talking about kind of the aftermath, right? As in, if something happens, just imagine if someone claims that you have been hacked and they show you a few proof videos and everything. Now you have to kind of prove that you haven't been hacked. And we always see those denying, so it's not going to be easy either. Business email compromise. We have seen many with AI help generating very convincing voice calls from CFOs, apparently. There was one financial company in Hong Kong which ended up sending $35 million to the attackers. And they swear that it really sounded like their boss. I mean, could be a nice excuse as well and blame it on the bad AI, but we will see more and more of those. So I'd say we see AI for phishing emails, I already mentioned, deep fakes, and of course for automation, right? Scaling up the attacker's perspective because they want to automate as well. They want to bring everything together. So taking information from social networks, personalizing the attacks against you, and then sending it directly to you. So my guess is we're going to end up this year with AI fighting against AI because, as Steven said, it's nice and good if you have the incident, but you might want to have it automatically remediated because otherwise, if you wait 24 hours, it might be too late. So that's my take on AI.
Thank you. Joseph, is artificial intelligence and machine learning, are insurance companies on board? Is it on their radar yet?
They are, well, the smart ones, yes. They are, I'll say the general consensus is they are absolutely terrified of this topic. With the human also, or often being the weakest link in this chain, once you have all of your other controls in place, they're absolutely terrified. Like I already got called in to do some consulting where the CEO's voice, right? They use that in a very convincing, in combination with a business email compromise, right? So it was the CEO's voice generated via AI, along with the business email compromise, and they sent a voicemail to the CFO to send a whole bunch of money. And so I got called in because the question was, does our policy cover this? So a law firm was like, hey, what's going on here? The general landscape right now, I'll say, of the insurance world is there aren't really any explicit per se exclusions for AI, machine learning, etc. But they are very terrified that we're just going to see a massive spike in claims, which then, of course, will drive a massive spike in price, which in turn will drive a massive spike in mandatory controls before you ever get a cyber insurance policy. So for the MSPs out there, I'd say maybe the silver lining in all of this is that we could very quickly see where, hey, security awareness training was mandatory and that was a source of revenue. We're coming up here very shortly. It will be some type of AI awareness training for employees to say, hey, here's how you use it. These are the guardrails, but also AI detection, right? Say like through a VoIP system, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess like all things, kind of a double-edged sword.
Okay. Steven, to you, are we ahead or behind of AI at the moment? I mean, Acronis has some AI on board. How does AI come into play on the good guy side of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the value of AI is analyzing complex data sets and the data around those attacks, right? To be able to predict whether or not it is an attack and what type of attack and what's going to happen next. Is really a great place for AI to help out. And it is, like Ken was saying, a kind of a battle of the good guys against the bad guys AI. And it's trying to figure out who can fool the other one faster. The other piece that I want to kind of mention is, and I think Joseph kind of touched on this, is the use of AI. So there's a lot of people out there who are putting tons of information and throwing it at AI, and maybe not even realizing the privacy issues that are around the fact that when you the AI that we use at Acronis, it's all in-house. That data doesn't leave the Acronis sphere of influence and domain. So we're not sending those out to public engines, where I think a lot of the risk that people may not even be aware of is, would you publish that information openly on the internet? Then you shouldn't be submitting it to an AI engine.
All right, fair enough. All right, guys, I'm going to gloss over some of our prepared panel questions. I'm going to jump right to the Q&A. And this first one's for you, Joseph. It's, they asked this earlier on when we were talking, and you said something about how an MSP shouldn't allow a client not to have cyber insurance. And as you were saying that, somebody asked the question, as an MSP, how much liability do I really have if my client is attacked? So what's the pass-through liability there?
That's a great question. So one, I would say part of that liability lies within the MSA, right? But also we have to just kind of take a step back and say, pragmatically speaking, if you go in front of a judge, if you go in front of a jury, right? It's much like when we go to a family barbecue and suddenly we know everything about every piece of technology ever made with no exceptions, right? And we in this world know that there's way more to it than that, right? Like, I don't know the first thing about Apple products. I don't use Apple products. But nonetheless, my grandmother's always like, hey, can you fix my phone? So we have to translate that in front of a court where, hey, even if it's not your fault, it could still be your problem, right? Even if the end user did something completely boneheaded they weren't supposed to do, these companies, when they lose a significant amount of money, right, their attorney is going to say, hey, maybe to get technical, it's a joint and severable liability state. So we're just going to sue everybody that had access to your network or ever touched it. We're just going to get ours back so you don't go out of business, Mr. and Mrs. Client. And then their insurance companies are going to hash it out, and there's going to be further court cases down the line. So what I tell all of my MSP clients is, hey, at a minimum, make sure you contractually require your clients to carry cyber insurance. But also part of the risk management process is, let's say you have a small dental office who are notorious for terrible cybersecurity. Nonetheless, you still need to always be recommending higher levels of security. You have to keep tabs on where the cybersecurity industry is headed, what the new tools are, right? So that way, if disaster strikes and your client comes back after you, right, you can say, hey, I told them there was a problem. I offered to help. They didn't want my help. How can you hold me at fault for that, right? And you don't have to be technical to really understand that type of argument. So something like, hey, 3-2-1 backups, immutable backups, EDR, et cetera, you go down the line, right? I would say you should always be having those discussions with your clients, keep them educated, because the liability, if you just look at the premiums for MSP insurance, they're going up, up, and up, because liability is likewise going up, up, and up.
Thanks for that answer. All right, so there's another question that we got. It was during your session, Stephen, but if it's okay with you, I'm gonna grab this and answer it real quick. The question is kind of a partial question. It was almost a statement. I have a client whose data must remain in Germany. All right, so I'm gonna say I can't speak for other backup, disaster recovery, and cybersecurity solutions. I know Acronis has 50, actually, as of this month, we'll have 54 data centers, and it's growing all the time. And we have 3 data centers in Germany. So if you follow Stephen's advice and configure it, you'll be able to take and put your client data and their security in a data center, which is probably compliant with the data sovereignty rules that you've got right there. So jumping to the next one, Candid, I have 3 versions of this question. Big companies and breaches make the headlines. Clients want minimum protection. Sometimes clients say they're too small to be hacked. Are SMBs really at risk? I've got like 3 versions of that question.
And for all of them, the answer is yes. But let me elaborate a little bit. So it is still one of those misconceptions there that small companies think, oh, we're not going to get attacked, right? Nobody knows about us. How should they ever find out? And small companies, as I said, there was one question, usually is around 50 employees. Mid-size might be 250 employees, right? So the really small, and yes, dental offices, I've seen my fair share there, so I agree with Joseph. They just think, we're going to keep the Windows XP. I mean, it's only barely connected to the internet, only once a month or so. We don't need to update. This is fatal, right? Because attackers very often, they just scan the whole internet. Nowadays, you can scan the whole internet, as in IPv4, on one port in 15 minutes. Which means in 15 minutes, I know who has an Exchange server which is out there, which is not patched. And then give me another 15 minutes, well, obviously hypothetical, then I could be already inside your organization. So those things happen. They don't really care who they attack. They actually find it out while they're in there. And depending on if you're a small company, they might just ask for 10,000, 100,000. If you're MGM Casino, yes, then it's going to raise up to, I think it was 40 or 50 million, right? So again, they will find you. So better make sure that you're resilient, you know kind of what you're exposing, and as we discussed, be prepared, right? Kind of what happens if. Can you restore? Do you have a liability issue, or do you have a cyber insurance and can say, yes, that risk I do accept?
Thank you. Hey guys, look, we are completely out of time, but I've got several questions about how to put together a cyber security package that clients will want to buy, that can walk people through different levels. And you know what, guys, while we were talking, I went out and I found this resource. This is a link to a presentation that one of our VPs did at MSP Global in 2023. And if you look at that link, it's a video. It'll walk you all the way through different pricing models and ending on what's called the good, better, best plus decoy pricing model. Make sure you watch it all the way through, at least to there. It'll give you an idea about how to structure your offerings so that the customers are very clear about what they're getting for what they're paying, and how they can upsell themselves on price. It's a good way to go. Listen, Joseph and Candid and Stephen, I can't do these things without guys like you. Thank you for attending. I got to call it. So thank you for participating. I appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. I got one more question for everybody. One more poll question. Let's go ahead and bring it up. It's this. It's what you want to take and do. How do you want Acronis to follow up with you, right? How do you want us to continue the conversation? I'm not going to make these results public. I just want you to click it so that our team knows how to get the information to you, and they can follow up in a way that works for you. And while this poll is still displayed, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to tell you about the Acronis Cyber Foundation. It's a great thing to investigate. Acronis.com is where you go for all your cyber protection and cybersecurity needs to protect your client data as an MSP. It's the best place to be. But Acronis.org is where you learn about our education initiatives, how we're building schools all around the world to teach people, and how you can take and participate as well to understand how you can take and do IT and education on your local environment so you can help make the world a better, safer place. There you go. I'm going to end that poll. That's that. You can scan these. Here's some additional resources for you, some marketing kit information, different training that you can use as this QR code. That's it, folks. I'll give you an extra 30 seconds or so to scan these QR codes. But don't worry, we are going to send you a copy of this video and some links in a follow-up email. With that said, we are a little bit over time. It's been a pleasure talking to you once again. I'm Jeff Hardy. I'm your host. Please come to our next webinar, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.